This is now familiar to scientists who call it a Gaussian curve, or in everyday terms, a bell curve. And the fact that it kept cropping up again and again in social statistics was then regarded as something almost miraculous. This seemed to be some kind of natural law that applied as much to human affairs as to the tossing of a coin or to planetary motions. So when the Belgian astronomer Adolphe Quetelet came to the French Royal Observatory in 1823 to learn from Laplace, he was fascinated by these statistical regularities in social data. And Quetelet recast Auguste Comte's social physics as mécanique sociale, a mechanical social science that was based on statistics. He wrote that whatever concerns the human species considered en masse belongs to the domain of physical facts. The greater the number of individuals, the more the individual will is submerged beneath the series of general facts which depend on the general causes according to which society exists and is conserved. And Quetelet's popularization of Laplace's data impressed many people. Among others, Karl Marx used these statistical laws in developing his labor theory of value. And the utilitarian political philosopher John Stuart Mill felt that this work supported his belief that history and society were bound by laws as absolute as those in the natural sciences. And he had this in mind when he wrote these words. He said, "Very events which in their own nature appear most capricious and uncertain, and which in any individual case no attainable degree of knowledge would enable us to foresee, occur when considerable numbers are taken into account, with a degree of regularity approaching to mathematical." They're essentially mathematical when there are enough people involved. Now, in an epic work called History of Civilization in England, an English writer named Thomas Henry Buckle suggested that history had this law-like inevitability. He said, "The great truth is that the actions of men are in reality never inconsistent, but however capricious they may appear, only form part of one vast system of universal order." So Buckle, like Adam Smith in the previous century, argued for the principle of political laissez-faire, and for the ability of people to govern themselves. Left to themselves, he said, societies will automatically produce order and law, while lawgivers, Buckle said, are nearly always the obstructors of society instead of its helpers. Well, I wonder whether this starts to sound familiar. At times, Buckle seemed to imply that individuals would find themselves compelled to act in a certain way in order to fulfill statistical quotas, and that seemed to undermine the very notion of free will, and that upset some people a lot. In Notes from the Underground, Fyodor Dostoevsky had this idea in mind when his narrator raves that a man would rather make himself mad than be constrained by this law-like reason. And Friedrich Nietzsche, who believed strongly that history was shaped by great men, was dismissive. He said, so far as there are laws in history, laws are worth nothing, and history is worth nothing. But Leo Tolstoy struggled with the questions that Buckle's deterministic view of history seemed to create, with what he called the relation of free will to necessity. What is the force that moves nations, he asked in War and Peace. Now, I've mentioned Adam Smith, in whose ideas on politics we can see the beginnings of the idea of what we would today call society as a self-organizing system. Now, Hobbes's Leviathan admitted that a stable nation needed trade, but Smith's world, when he wrote his great book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, in 1776, his world was completely different from that of Hobbes. There was a new social order by that time, and it was ruled by trade. So for Adam Smith, wealth meant industry, and he knew that the rise of the mercantile system had made commerce the key to the wealth of a nation. Now, Smith took a similar view to human behaviour as Hobbes. He felt that people are basically out for whatever they can get. Now, in Hobbes' political theory, he found a foundation for his model of how the market system works. So while Hobbes' individuals tried to accumulate power, Smith considered that merchants and traders tried to accumulate wealth. But then how, in a greedy society that has any centralised means of market regulation, how do the people nevertheless generally manage to obtain goods at prices that don't make them bankrupt? What's to stop traders from charging whatever they like for what they're selling? Well, the answer is competition. Traders who inflate their prices will lose customers to others who maintain their prices at an affordable level, and so they will go out of business. The pressure of competition in a free market economy, Smith argued, should ensure that goods will always be sold at their true value, their natural price, which is an honest measure of the amount of materials and labour that went into making them. Anyone who charges more than that can always be undercut by their competitors. And Smith argued that this self-regulating market will make sure that all things that people need will be provided to them. So there's no need for some central authority that assigns people different jobs to make sure there are enough tailors and cobblers and bakers and so on. Wherever there is a demand, there is a profit to be made, and someone will come along to make it. So in Smith's view, good in the form of a fair and comprehensive market, good can emerge from selfishness. And acting from pure self-interest, Adam Smith said, traders provide goods for everyone at affordable prices, and there are no gaps in the market. This is how he said it. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard of their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, their selfishness, and never talk to them of our necessities, but of their advantage. Meanwhile, Smith said, governments that try to regulate trade in the interests of society as a whole are doing nothing more than hinder, nothing more than impair the efficiency of the market. Now, Smith's invisible hand is prefigured in a poem, a satirical poem, written by a Dutch physician named Bernard Mandeville, called Fable of the Bees, or Private Vices, Public Benefits. And Mandeville suggested that vices, like vanity, can work to the good of a society, in this case by increasing the demand for luxury goods and therefore providing employment in the manufacturing. In other words, society needs a little vice in order to keep the wheels turning. This, of course, is the origin of Wall Street's Gordon Gekko and his famous slogan, "Greed is good." So the message of the Wealth of Nations is one, again, of laissez-faire. Leave the market alone and it will take care of itself. And this gradually became seen as a self-evident and natural law of the marketplace. Now, Adam Smith never wrote about market forces as such, but the idea of causative forces like those in Newton's gravity is evidently there in his work. And by the early 19th century, the idea that there were fundamental laws of economics, just as there were in physics, had taken firm root. And that belief has stayed in place ever since. This is how the American writer Ralph Waldo Emerson put it. Now, academic economists are now perfectly familiar with the fact that there are problems with this picture. Joseph Stiglitz is one of them. He's a Nobel laureate economist. And this is how he put it in the same article that I mentioned earlier. He said, for over a quarter of a century, we have known that Smith's conclusions do not hold when there is imperfect information. And all markets, especially financial markets, are characterized by information imperfections. The reason the invisible hand often seems invisible is that it's not there. The pursuit of self-interests by Enron and WorldCom did not lead to societal